What if some dreams are showing where your foundation leads before waking life reaches the outcome? Scripture says that in the night the heart communes and the spirit makes diligent search. Ecclesiastes says a dream can come through what has occupied us. So not every dream is prophecy. Some may be the inner person searching through fear, desire, memory, wounds, and the structure beneath our choices. That may be why dreams speak in images. A hungry man dreams he eats. A thirsty man dreams he drinks. What is hidden within takes abstract form. But Scripture also shows God entering that space. Job says he may speak in a dream, open a man's ears, turn him from his purpose, and preserve him from destruction. Nebuchadnezzar saw himself as a great tree. The dream exposed the pride supporting his kingdom, and showed where that foundation would end if he refused to turn. A true dream from God does not always confirm what you want. Sometimes it confronts what you are becoming. Visions must be tested the same way. Jeremiah warned of people speaking visions from their own hearts. Peter's vision did the opposite. It corrected the structure he already carried. Emotional intensity is not proof. A vivid image is not authority. And a dream that flatters desire may reveal the heart, not God's voice. Test the source, test the fruit. Does it agree with Scripture? Does it lead toward repentance? Does it bring you beneath Christ? A dream may expose the direction of a foundation. A vision may reveal the outcome of a continued path. But only Jesus Christ is the truth, and no dream or vision should ever be trusted above His word. Before you trust what you saw, ask where it is leading you.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to another Webster report on this Sunday, the 26th of July 2026 on our Gregorian calendar. Alex, interesting week. Some of the articles are quite fantastical. We did mention about the sexually transmitted diarrhea and things like that, but one we've got that's coming back after thousands of years apparently is leprosy. There seems to be an outbreak in Florida due to eating not cooked properly armadillo. Now, I don't know if that's me just thinking that the world is just getting crazier, because I never knew armadillo was a thing. But can you cast any common sense onto this week, Alex?
Well, that's media representation again. And we were having this conversation, weren't we, before we went on air about the objectivity of the world that we have mediated to us by media. Clearly, there are operators, and we don't always know, what their operational goals are. It looks incredibly crazy, but what I would contrast that with is that first reel that you put on. The second one, by the way, there was no volume on it. And so I don't know if everybody else couldn't hear the second one, but the first one, the volume was on and it was really good. It was very balanced. For me, it asked all the right questions. It was very well presented. And that's a form of media. Okay, it's got a specific message. It's not talking about current affairs. But if you compare and contrast that with the type of crazy stuff you're seeing in the media now, it's like a full-on assault of insanity and confusion. So, as I often talk of late, and I'm studying and writing about this, ecology ultimately is life, and a healthy ecology needs to be grounded in something, in an order which continues to propagate life in a non-deranged fashion. By definition, insanity and confusion are not a productive form of order. It leads to this decay and disintegration. So what we can say, quite apart from the material facts, is that there are certain types of ecology that we promote which bring about health, and that applies to individual life, family life, community life, national life, global reality, and then all the distorted forms. And we can debate, and we do regularly, about where those distortions come from. I do largely believe that these, what we might call elites or globalists or oligarchs or whatever you want to describe them as, are like us. They've got particular views of the world, and in many cases, for example, think about peak oil. It's been disproven that this peak oil theory, about 2012, there was going to be peak oil and it was going to go down. That sponsored a lot of the climate narratives, a lot of the stuff about fossil fuel. And what that tells you is you've got a small coterie of very powerful people, very wealthy people and influencers in media that have a very concrete belief about how natural resources will be used up if too many people are using them. That's why they don't want people driving cars, flying on planes. They want people in 15-minute cities. It's not just because they're nefarious, controlling scumbags. It's because they genuinely and mistakenly believe that what they think are the limited resources of the world are going to be used up by us lot. And that's why they want to get rid of the useless eaters who they deployed in the Industrial Revolution to dig the stuff out of the ground that would improve the quality of life. Now they think that's gone too far, so we need to get rid of some of these useless eaters, and they put useful idiots in positions of prominence. And we might say within that, Andy Burnham and his, number 10 of the North, which I found out actually today, they took the lease out on that on the 8th of June before the by-election itself. So they were pretty sure that it was going to be happening. And it was pretty much the case that Fabian Andy has been groomed into this position. He's saying all the right things. It's just verbal. And unfortunately, they know, in terms of these useless eaters, that the useful idiots in positions of power, the influencers, will be able to be suckered by a few little promises, creating a token position on the North, as if that's going to rebalance the North-South divide. Make these bus fares at £2 national. Anyone goes, oh, look at that. He's really making a difference. We're not going to ask any questions about spending. We're not going to, ask any questions about Parliament being suspended. And they'll manufacture everything to make sure there's an election at the optimal time. At the moment, it's all optics. It's all making things look as if Andy's the new kid on the block with refreshing new ideas. He won't be able to deliver. But again, media and all the people that they put in significant places to propagandize will put this sunshine message out to contrast this doom and gloom message. And it is, it's stage managed. And for us, the key is not lamenting that, because if we do, we'll make ourselves powerless. It's to acknowledge that the ecology is deranged and ultimately to ground ourselves in ecologies that are not deranged.
Even when you're trying to put it together and it's not deranged, Alex, it's a deranged society. So we seem to, it just seems to have this cancellation effect, doesn't it? But you mentioned then about the Fabian Society. When we look at about things like this, we can see. If I can just. Let me know if you can hear this.
Yeah, I will do. I'll check that for you.
Like we were saying, you just mentioned Fabian Andy. A lot of people don't know, or maybe some don't even care what the Fabian Society is, but it could be a very interesting thing that we should be taking some interest in, I would say.
Let's start with their origins and founding. The Fabian Society was founded in 1884 in London. Its key figures were Sidney Webb, his wife Beatrice Webb, playwright George Bernard Shaw, and a handful of other middle-class intellectuals. Their mission, to bring socialism to Britain, but not the fiery, revolutionary Marxism of the barricades. No, their genius, or their trick, depending on your view, was patience. They believed socialism could be achieved not through revolution, but through slow infiltration. Institutions, schools, civil service, political parties slowly re-engineer the system from within. And their name comes from Quintus Fabius Maximus, a Roman general who fought Hannibal, not with head-on battles, but with delay, attrition, and gradual strategy. Fabian tactics became a phrase for winning by patience. They embraced that. They would wait, wear down, chip away, and never, ever stop. That's why they've lasted so long. They weren't a flash-in-the-pan radical movement. They were termites, and termites don't shout. They just quietly eat away at the foundations until the whole house is theirs. And what's worse is they told you straight, the wolf in sheep's clothing emblem, not even hidden. It was a statement. We'll dress our intentions in respectable, harmless clothing while our real goal is power. Later, when people started pointing out how sinister that looked, they swapped it for a tortoise. When I strike hard was the logo. Same idea. Their approach was permutation. Rather than build their own mass party from scratch, they would worm their way into existing institutions. They joined the Liberal Party. They infiltrated trade unions. They wrote pamphlets and books that educated the next generation of civil servants. And their 1889 pamphlet, Fabian Essays in Socialism, was a bestseller. They created the London School of Economics in 1895. Yes, the LSE was literally a Fabian creation, designed to train generations of administrators and economists in gradualist socialism. And when Labour finally emerged in the early 1900s, the Fabians were there to provide the brains, the policies, and the patient strategy. But you can't tell the story of Labour without the Fabian Society. You see, Ramsay MacDonald, the first Labour Prime Minister, was a Fabian. Clement Attlee, who built the post-war welfare state, was a Fabian. And Tony Blair was the chairman of the Fabian Society before he became Prime Minister. Even Keir Starmer is a long-standing Fabian. It's like a conveyor belt. The party might change faces, but the Fabian blueprint stays the same. And their big moment was 1945. Clement Attlee's Labour government rolled out the NHS, nationalised industries, expanded welfare, and reshaped Britain after the war. The Fabians saw it as their triumph, and in many ways it was. But here's the catch. It wasn't revolution, it was bureaucracy. More control, more state, more centralisation. And once those structures are in, they rarely get rolled back. Fast forward to the 1990s, Tony Blair modernised Labour with his third way, but the skeleton underneath was still Fabian, pragmatic, managerial, obsessed with long-term nudges. Rather than open debate, Blair described himself proudly as a Fabian, and his government was packed with them. Today, Keir Starmer is cut from the exact same cloth. Polished, technocratic, loyally, the classic Fabian. Looks boring, sounds reasonable, but behind it is the same ideology of control. Now you might ask, why does this matter today? Well, because Fabianism is the grandfather of the modern technocratic elite. The idea that unelected intellectuals, planners, and experts should quietly steer society without asking permission. Does that sound familiar? It should. It's exactly how the EU operates. It's also exactly how the World Economic Forum talks. It's exactly how every global governance project works. You don't get a choice. They'll just tell you it's for your own good. And it will be phased in gradually until it's too late to object. You see, the Fabians believed in educating the public into socialism, not asking them. And if the public kicked up a fuss, they'd wait them out, they'd work around them, they'd drown them in endless reports and consultations until the opposition wore down. That's how net zero is being sold. That's how digital ID is being pushed. Fabian tactics all the way. So what's the actual problem with Fabianism? Some will say, well, they gave us the NHS, they gave us welfare, they expanded education, but the cost was democracy itself being diluted. The Fabian method is elitist to its core. It assumes the public are too thick to understand big ideas. It assumes change must be sneaked past people, not debated openly. And it leaves us with political parties that all drink from the same intellectual trough. That's why Labour and the Tories often look like two wings of the same bird, because the civil service, the universities, and the think tanks have been permeated for over a century by the Fabian Society. It's not a conspiracy theory. The Fabians publish their reports openly. Their conferences are attended by MPs, journalists, corporate lobbyists. They're not hiding. They're just banking on the fact that you're too busy working, paying bills, and living life to even notice. That's their biggest trick. They even have a wiki page. And I'll be blunt, when you see Keir Starmer reading bland sound bites about long-term missions, you're not hearing an original idea. You're not hearing anything constructed by the cabinet. You're hearing 140 years of Fabian gradualism polished up to 2025. Starmer isn't leading, he's recycling, and Blair before him was doing exactly the same thing. You see, if the Fabians were a band, they'd be Coldplay, quiet, unthreatening, but somehow still everywhere. If they were a pet, they'd be a cat, sneaking around, knocking your stuff over, and then looking at you like it was your fault. And if they were honest, their slogan wouldn't be for the many, not the few. It would be for the few disguised as the many. The wolf in sheep's clothing wasn't a joke. It was a confession. And Britain has been living under Fabian tactics for over a century without most people even knowing the name or who they are. So to wrap it up, let's pull it all together. The Fabian Society is not some fringe club. It's the quiet architect of modern Britain, From Attlee's welfare state to Blair's third way to Starmer's grey technocracy, the Fabians provided the ideology, the strategy, and the methods. And their method is always the same: gradualism, permutation, control dressed up as compassion. That's why I think people need to know the name, because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. The endless long-term missions, the reports, the nudges, the policies no one asked for, but everyone somehow ends up living under. That is Fabianism, and it ties directly into the same unelected global elite thinking we see with the WEF, the EU, and every other alphabet organization that thinks it knows better than you. The choice is really quite simple. Either we start calling this out, challenging it, demanding openness and accountability, or we keep sleepwalking while the wolf tightens its sheepskin. So I say to you this: your move, Britain.
Our move indeed. Slowly, slowly catch a monkey. We mentioned the boiling pot quite a few times over the last couple of months, Alex, and it seems like the gas has been turned up a little bit. It's starting to bubble.
Yeah, I mean, that was a very good, if very dense, description of Fabianism. And overall, apart from the fact there's a lot of material to unpack there, it's a good general statement about the state of the world. And the mention of technocracy is contemporary and relevant. Then one of the issues is, though, for those who might be a little bit confused or try to keep up with joining the dots in the argument, is that he hasn't really sufficiently described why socialism is such a bad thing. And unless you do that clearly, you can sort of run ahead of yourself. And the reason why socialism is a bad thing is plain and simple, because it's not true to how life is. It's an artificially imposed, controlled system and an ethic, but based on what we see in identity politics as well, where groups, the status of groups, the so-called equality of groups is placed above the rights of individuals. And that's a sociological as much as an ethical thing. And it's also got theological implications, philosophical implications, in the sense of, what is it to be a human being? We are gregarious, we are social, but we're also individuated. So in original tribal culture, we were exclusively tribal, and individuals as such didn't exist. And in some ways that had good aspects to it, but it had drawbacks. And for development and growth to take place, humans needed to specialize, they needed to individuate, they needed to become distinct and separate from each other in order to excel, in order to stand out. You see the consequences of that through specialization. Even if you look at football and you look at the way academies work, grassroots football, the greater concentrated wealth, power, control and influence begins to dominate the hierarchical control of football. At one time, a few years ago, there used to be feeder clubs for Premiership clubs that would just develop and cherry pick talent. So what happens is, as you individuate, it starts to have a highly professionalizing and specializing impact, which is good in terms of the technical excellence that's achieved through role specialization. But the problem with that is then, when Roy Keane, for example, talks about the prawn sandwich brigade, he noticed how, these rich people were buying up these executive boxes. Football was moving more away from the grassroots. It was moving more towards the money. And then, you've got footballers on £350,000 to £400,000 every week. And the problem with that is it plays into the hands of people like Zach Polanski and the socialists, who can legitimately say, we've gone too far in that direction of individuation, which they crudely associate with capitalism, which is a false correlation. But it looks plausible to people who think, well, why should those footballers be earning £450,000 a week when it might take me 15 or 20 years to earn that amount of money, and he could be injured and sat on a bench and they're making it every week. So you can see in football a little microcosm of this macrocosm. So there's good and bad in all of this, but socialism, as underwritten by what Fabianism develops, has these consequences because it's not true to fundamentally how reality is. So we've got to start with that. Socialism, it then gets linked into concepts that get used in the left of social justice. The thing about social justice is this is what all the leftists start batting on about. Social justice is a doctrine that gets applied to things like asylum and migration because it's totally egalitarian with no boundaries, no borders, no economic considerations. It says the world should be totally borderless and everybody should just be able to move freely, and doesn't look at cultural differences, economic differences and things like this. It just obliterates all of it and says we're all one, man, and you get your hippie peace pipe out and start smoking it and passing it around, one love. Now, nice ideal doesn't work in reality. Again, it's not realistic. Social justice is a fixed characteristic. Somebody always defines what social justice is. And then it's their model of social justice that dominates everybody else. So it's fixed, it's unhealthy. Better than social justice would be social responsibility, because you're turning it not into a goal or a measurable end product that's imposed on people. You're saying the individual, not the group, needs to show proactive consideration for the society, the community that they're living in. So social responsibility is and can only be a good thing. And then you require social action in order for social responsibility to be meaningful. So things like social responsibility and social action are radically different to things like socialism and social justice. So socialism has just become a given. And it was interesting in that reel that technocracy was talked about, Fabian society was talked about, there was a logical flaw, but he didn't actually explain why socialism is a bad thing. And it's for all the reasons I've just mentioned.
Well, that leads us into the next video, because, you know, we want to keep this stuff simple so everybody can understand it.
Teach your kids about socialism by making them clean the bathroom, then pay them $10, then take $7 of those dollars away and give those $7 to a sibling that did not work. I bet your child won't be a socialist for long.
I don't think could describe it any better than that.
Yeah, exactly. It's imposed and enforced by people who've decided for you what's healthy. And the problem is, if we gave people the scope and the tools to think for themselves, they would very quickly work that logic out. It doesn't actually produce the envisaged end product of equality for all. It leads to tyranny and oppression. You can't impose a set of ideals upon everybody. So the difficulty then is, how do you get a bunch of people to come together? Well, okay, so if they're not insane, we can presume that they're relatively rational, and rational doesn't mean in right mind. It means that they're working towards certain ends which make sense to them. And that's what every individual should do in order to survive. If you don't advocate for your own ends, then you're not rational. Even the zombies are rational, to quote my friend Ray Scott Percival, because although we think they're totally mindless, they are rational. They attempt to do everything in their power to secure fresh brains. So they're rational, even though we consider them to be mindless. So mindless and irrational are not the same thing. And we need to bear that in mind. We then also, if we've only got rationality in terms of we meet our required ends in order to survive, flourish and prosper, in order to coexist with other people in a society without socialism being imposed, we need to be able to communicate. We need to be able to, and communication involves cycles of communication. I speak, you listen, you speak, I listen. We reflect back that we understand each other. That's a time-consuming process. Most people don't want that. They simply want to silence the opposition in what has now become an entrenched culture war. So the goal is to win, which is zero sum. In order to have winners, you must have losers. And climbing a greasy pole, securing your personal advantages, your tribe's advantages, your family bloodline's advantages becomes dominant. You will then become prepared to manipulate ideologies, use the media to do so, brainwash people, lie, say, trust the science when it's got nothing to do with science, so that the useful idiots will be training the useless eaters to believe nonsense rather than using the eyes that God gave them and the tongue that's in them to communicate with each other, to challenge healthily and proportionately. So we've got basically societal breakdown because we've got a tour de force going on that's been leveraged against the people. And the only way that changes is if people recognise that, yes, they must, as an individual, seek to achieve the ends that are meaningful to them in order to survive and thrive, and that they must be prepared to develop the tools to communicate meaningfully with other people, to listen to them, as well as to communicate and verbalise their own opinions to them. When you cut that skill set out, you're literally going to get a bunch of people waiting for the tide to come in, waiting for the tide to come out, and opportunistically catch the crabs in the rock pool, because you'll take away their agency, you'll disempower them, and they become totally reliant on the system that's telling them what to do. And it's a slow process of erosion as well, so people don't notice it very, very well.
Well, that's a massive issue because, like I said, I know people who voted for Andy Burnham because he's a good bloke. Yeah, we can clearly see where his cloth has been cut. We can clearly see that Tony Blair made this prediction of him being a future PM 25 years ago. And, when we see that, as you said, that the offices were already sorted, it was like everybody knew that this is what was going to happen. So if you do play this long game, like what the Fabian Society do, then you play it slow enough that you can virtually predict the future, because they know how the masses are going to work in with this. If we've got a society, though, that's been taught things as well, been groomed, we only need that one thing to go through one, let's say 2 generations at the top. Bearing in mind, after World War One, that killed a lot of the people who knew what the old world was like, what true history was like before we get to the 50s, 60s into an education system where it's been quite clear, Alex, that we've got our history slightly manipulated, and there's so many questions to be asked. We're looking at architecture and buildings that it was just impossible for people to build in the timescale and what those peoples were allegedly all about. So when we're voting for people who we believe are going to change the world for our benefit, and we see that they're cut from a cloth, like the Fabian Society, where they're basically saying, yeah, we're the wolf in sheep's clothing. We're just going to come in and pretend, and through parliamentary privilege, we'll tell lies, and you'll fall for it all. So is it just a case of, once the people have got that and they've ran with it, it's, you might get 3 generations in before somebody goes, hey, hang on a minute, this doesn't work in our favour. And because there's only 1 or 2, they're silenced. It's the same old tactic that's never changed, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, Luke, the thing about that is, it's all about image management. If you look at Andy Burnham, which is about really about managing people's expectations. So it's one extended public relations exercise, and because people tend not to think for themselves, they're able to be fairly straightforwardly, just dominated in the thought structures. And when you look at rationality and communication, it takes quite a bit of resilience to be able to formulate coherent ideas, because you need to have had tested and grounded experience. If parts of your experience have got walled off, and let's face it, lots of people have been traumatized and harmed in society, not just by random events, but by calculated campaigns people are being waged war upon right across the board. It means that they shut down parts of themselves and develop reduced resilience to think, let's call it broad spectrum, Now, if you think about a wolf in sheep's clothing as well, it's interesting, isn't it? That we know that's a biblical metaphor, but actually Jesus applied it to, he said, beware of false prophets who come to you, yeah, as wolves in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves.
Yeah.
So that aspect of false prophet. Now, a prophet isn't somebody, people typically think of prophets as people who predict the future, which was an element of the prophetic role. But really, a prophet is a person who speaks for God, in the name of God, under his authority, and under his command. So they're a mouthpiece for what? Divine truth, divine order, and therefore a correctly arranged ecology. So God's prophets are always calling the people back to the correct alignment that aligns with his order, his template, his blueprint for life. Not as an oppressor, not as a tyrant, getting people, cracking the whip. God doesn't enslave people. Some people portray it that way. It's to liberate people. That's what Jesus said, I've come basically for this purpose, to, liberate the captives, to bring recovery of sight to the blind. So God's agenda is liberative, and it's not just something that we declare, it's something that we embody and that we do. So a false prophet is the derangement. It is somebody who comes along and pretends to be harmless, maybe even helpful, maybe even nourishing, but actually beneath it all, it's a cover story. And this is a false prophet. This is somebody not necessarily bringing false divine messages, but somebody giving a deranged order while selling it as a positive order. And of course, socialism is a deranged order, as I said, because it is not aligned with principles of life. It's an imposed tyranny, making everybody equal. And then we know that within these things, some people are more equal than others.
Yeah. Well, when we look at it like that, and we look at when we said about the education system and all this teaching, it's about when ideas come up, when they're introduced. If you introduce them to generations, this is why we ended up in an economy where the people are the creditors. The people know that they are the creditors, yet they act as debtors, but they don't know they're acting as debtors because we were taught this way. But again, at the end of the day, what it comes down to is the people there who are teaching us the right things or the wrong things, or do people just come up with ideas that seem to suit a few?
Right, yeah. I mean, that's an interesting point. You can focus on the ideas and the correctness, the rightness or wrongness. So the person that brings forth the ideas, and you can get think tanks to generate them, then you propagate them through various propaganda channels of media. But you've also got the receiver of the message. So yes, there's the purveyor of the message, the designer of the message. That's a part of it. You can look at the objective content, but the receiver is more important, because you can give nailed on truth and objective fact to a deranged person and they will misreceive it. They will distort it. They will hear it through their own filters. So realistically, when you get to a certain point, the objective aspect of it is less important. You can bring fantastic truth and it will get distorted. So this is something that's actually crucial to think about. And the distinctive factor is what I already kind of mentioned in terms of reason and communication, which keeps people in a grounded center. They will soberly look at facts and they will make a detached and objective evaluation of the facts that have been presented as far as possible. Now, the sources could be corrupt, so they could be being misled. Well, that's one part of it, as I say, the objectivity. But when you get to what we get now with tribalism and emotivism, people have become so emotional and they've been primed, they've been trained into black or white views. So immediately, if something is not tribally coded, if it's not wearing the right badge, if it's got particular associations with a particular wing of the two wings of this equally corrupt bird, then they'll immediately go into that programmed mode, and they will respond not to the content, but to the tone, the camp, the tribe that generated it, and they will immediately be defensive. And when they're defensive, they'll be shut off, which means they won't be listening. And if they're not listening, there's no communication. When there's no communication, you're susceptible to messaging, and you'll just internalize the messaging that resonates with what you already believe. So you'll never be able to change your opinion if you don't think critically and you don't evaluate the facts from as detached a position as possible, which is essentially what rationality used to be, cultivating a sense of detached objectivity whereby you could actually assess things properly. It's like being drunk. People say nonsense. They lose the capacity of the depth perception. When they get angry, it's similarly, they lose their ability to judge distance. They might crash the car because the brain is not in the optimal state for processing.
And again, when you can't do that critical thinking, when you can't have your belief tested, and you said it gives you all for programming, again, that's where we just accept things. We don't question things. We don't question things like the taxes that we're being taught that we must pay. You know, these are the interesting facts for me, pal. We're getting to a point that surely there should be something inside us that says everything's really bad, and no matter who we vote for, it doesn't change. But this one might be different. This one might change something. How if you can't have that where you can get new information and look at the two, your belief and the new information, does the new information touch, change, or does it completely repel away? If you can't do that, how are you ever going to change any of that?
Yeah, you're not. The difficulty which compounds this is most people, even though they don't believe, if you said to most people, do you believe that the world is created for you? They'd say, no, of course not. I've got free will. I do this, I do that. But if they were to actually examine most of their actions, most people's actions are scripted. They are like a hamster on a hamster wheel, and they wouldn't know how to change it. Now, even though they would protest at the level of belief, they must live according to that, where reality is curated for them. And social media, for example, makes it even worse. People's identities are curated, their meanings are curated. What constitutes a happy and successful life is largely curated. People have lost the ability to decide for themselves, like, what would make me happy? And if they don't know, and ever since being a kid, they've never really known, then they will have to follow an external script. So it isn't that, and people need to tell themselves, and they're not following anybody else's script. But when you strip it right back, they are. So the problem is, most people aren't even able to notice that there's a problem, because it's like the chameleon that just blends into its background. It's like it's camouflaged. It's beneath the level of regular perception. And what tends to happen then is, unless people experience pain and consequence, they don't change. They'll carry on saying, well, I'm on this life raft in the open sea. If you've been on a life raft in stormy conditions in the open sea, surviving for about 3 years, that becomes your normal. So it becomes very difficult for people then to calibrate, and they just, well, that's just how it is. It's like with digital ID. Eventually, if that were to come in, within no time, it would just become everyone's normal. So nobody debates the time before digital ID after about a month, because it's just a new reality. And these Fabians and others know. That's why Softly, Softly Can't Monkey works, because they know that people will adapt rather than die, even if it's conformity. And that's a decision most people will make, because they're more concerned about fitting in and continuing to be okay than they are with being authentic and asking difficult questions, because they often reason, well, even if I asked those questions, as an individual, I wouldn't be able to drum up enough momentum to change anything. So I just need to adapt, and adapting is surviving, and people want to survive. So it's very difficult to shift it once it's entrenched like it is now.
Not only is it difficult to shift, it's easier to program and fool people than it is to actually show the people that they've been fooled. And I've been trying to get this video to play to just see just how people can have these things brought into them.
They earn the money, we take some. They spend the money, we take some. And if they buy a property, we'll take some. But if they sell the property, we'll still take some. Now, if they invest their money wisely and grow it, we'll take some. If they invest their money poorly and lose it, I wish we could help. And if they want to get a tiny bit of enjoyment in their miserable lives with cigarettes or alcohol, we'll take even more. Now, the more money they make, the more money we take, unless they make a lot of money or they're friends of ours, in which case we take none. And then once a year, even though we know exactly how much they should have paid, they need to figure it out for themselves and let us know, because there's a chance that we could take even more.
There you have it. Right, blatant. That's everything that is wrong with this world. And what was the video saying? They don't know. It's not up to us. It's not up to them to tell us. Everybody who I speak to, Alex, knows that they are a creditor. That's what they know. And they all will say, we know it's a debt-based economy. When they're asked, well, why do you act as debtor and pay bills? You see the buffering, you see the spinning circle. There's just nothing there, because how do you answer that? That's a good point. I am a creditor. Debtors are the ones that pay. I'm not a debtor. I'm a creditor. So what does a creditor do? That's where we should be at. But instead, vote for Andy because he's a good bloke, and we can just see what socialism is willing to bring in. And when we look at our university campuses now, we're seeing 19, 20-year-olds who are saying that socialism is the future. We've done this. We know where this ends up. What would be different this time, Alex?
Nothing. But obviously, when things skew in a direction like they have for so long, people like Polanski and others and Bernie Sanders mobilizing people against billionaires, they will misidentify what the problem is. It's like if you look at any tree, Jesus talked about trees and fruit, didn't he? But if you've got a fruit tree, most people are interested in the ripening of the fruit and securing the fruit, because that seems to be the purpose of the tree. But there's a lot more going on that leads to that fruit, and potentially, could get compromised by blight, could be attacked by insects and eaten. There's so many processes that can get in the way of that fruit becoming something that gets delivered to your plate and that you eat or pluck from the tree when it's ripe. You've got the whole of the tree or the bush, and you've got the main trunk that goes into the ground. It's got the roots, the nutrients are in the soil, and most of the stuff that people look at has got nothing to do. Like, they don't see the ecology under the soil that's affecting the roots. They don't see the relationship, the mycorrhizal relationship with certain fungi in certain cases. They don't see the total ecology that ultimately leads to the burn of the fruit that they eat. They just want the fruit. This is why you get companies who say, well, there's all these insects or whatever compromising this crop. Right, let's put a bunch of chemicals on it to stop that happening. They don't think about the ecological consequences, the knock-on effects, not just for the whole ecology there, but for your stomach after it's the fruit that's got pesticides in it. People now detect Roundup in wheat, and it's in the food chain. So people don't think ecologically, they think short term, they think cosmetic. They think this is good because it appears good. It's better to have more money than less. If I could have, a a grape bush with one big grape on it rather than, 200 grapes that I've got to harvest, it takes me longer, I would just take the one grape. But the one grape growing on a tree would weigh the tree down and it's disproportionate. So the people who would want to genetically modify it to ensure that, okay, so now it's going to kill any insect that eats it, or we're going to make it supersized, so it's going to have certain other knocking effects. They don't care about those extra aspects that derange the ecology. So people aren't bothered about iceberg processes that they can't see. Out of sight, out of mind. I don't know. That's not just because we've been conditioned and trained by manipulators. They've exploited that characteristic in us. They didn't create it. It's a part of us. We should be able to recognize that those failures or these attempts to adjust are actually harmful ecologically, but we don't. We go, brilliant. I've got my Dyson there, it's 2,000 watts. Why would I want a 1,000 watt vacuum cleaner? I can spend double to get 2,000 watts. Well, maybe because you only need 1,000 watts to do the job. No, but I want better. Oh, look at colours on it. Oh, look at the way it's branded. Oh, I've got a Dyson. What have you got? Oh, you just got a crappy Henry. Rubbish. So people then develop identity investments and this cosmetic thing becomes more and more pronounced. Next thing you know, everyone's living superficially. And then it's that line in the Bible that at the end times, these doctrines will be preached and people will select the doctrines that tickle their ears. The things that they want to hear are the things that they will select. And truth becomes a bitter pill to swallow. People are immune or even worse, kind of resistant to truth. And until that changes, people will keep choosing the blind, easy path, which in fact isn't a narrow path. It's a broad path that leads to a place that's going to lead to destruction on a pretty wide scale, mate.
That's the division, though, isn't it? The division is being brought where truth is now alienating people. People just do not want to see that truth. And I've experienced this firsthand. I'm going to try this video again to see if it plays. You can hear it with the sound, because this is exactly what we've just been speaking about.
And I used to have this mental illness where I thought logical arguments would change people's mind. Like I thought laying out all the facts, the proof, the evidence calmly would make them think like, you're right, I need to reevaluate everything that I just said. No, like they'll just still argue with you like they're getting paid for it. And what I'm starting to realize is you can't argue with somebody using facts when they belief's not based on facts.
That's where we have it. The beliefs aren't based on facts, they're based on opinions of other people's. I had them. I had opinions based on my mum and dad's opinions. And when you find out your mum and dad were wrong, well, that should rock your world. It certainly rocked mine. But it should rock your world because they give you that. Remember, we spoke about it last week, the foundation. What foundation are we starting off on? If we start off on lies straight away, that means everything that we're going to try and stand on is going to be false with a bit of truth. And that's all we see throughout our history and throughout these bloodlines. We see the false and the truth. And the false keeps trying to get back in to the truth because it's got a few bits of truth. So people have been introduced to both of the lines, and sometimes it meanders in and out of the truth and the false. So people are on that nice little slide where, oh, it's truth, it's not, it's true, it's not, it's true, it's not. We know the difference. But what if you're only ever given a truth and a falseness and not the truth, so that you can see everything that's false? Because you don't, once you know, as I said before, I got to know everything in this world was false, bits of truth in it. But there were some massive whoppers that had been taught to me. That meant there's got to be a truth out there somewhere. Was it with a man? I couldn't find it because all I could see was men with really good intentions, but were liars because they didn't understand what this was like. When you read the Bible for yourself without the opinions, the Bible goes against every religion. It shows that it's about a relationship with the one true God, and there's only one way to do that. If we've got that foundation wrong, everything is wrong. So we have to go back to that foundation. If we don't, then, as we always say in law, it stands unrebutted.
Yeah, I mean, I would add again, I've been saying this for a long time in a lot of different contexts. I remember when we did the police service, Paul, and we have David Robinson there, and God rest his soul. And he was a bit of a warrior for the cause, but he ended up with a few little blinkers on. And I think we live in a world today that some call a post-truth world. That's been fairly common. And, people say post-industrial, post-modern, post many things, basically. And I think
post-yesterday.
Post-yesterday. I think that people have become, and I've said this in the truth movement, they become one-dimensional about truth, because truth tends to get reduced then to propositional logic within philosophy, syllogisms. If A equals, then B, C follows. So it's like there are premises and logical arguments, which is deductive, and then conclusions. You can set up these syllogisms that are logical artifacts, and you can test truth in that way. But like we were saying again before the show, early on in Jesus' ministry, in Mark's gospel, he encounters the leper, and leprosy's never been cured. There's provision made for the cleansing of leprosy in the Levitical laws, and giving an offering to the priest, showing up and so on. And Jesus obviously heals this leper and sternly warns him not to go shooting his mouth off, not to go proclaiming, because the time hasn't come yet. There's a timing issue. And what does he do? Maybe he's overwhelmed and overjoyed by the power of the experience, and he's been liberated from leprosy. But the point was to show up with the priests and offer the offering that Moses commanded as a testimony to them, a testimony in actions rather than words. And when he started blabbing, it created such problems that people were coming from all around, crowding him. And so the divine purpose was thwarted because it was too declarative. It was proclaimed, and that wasn't the right strategy. So truth tends to get reduced to correct content communicated to others, internalized after being accepted, and so on. And there's an element of that, but it's come to dominate. So Jesus didn't just say, I am the truth. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So a way is a path through thick and thin, up and down, meandering paths. Life is an embodied experience. Plato, in classical civilization, the foundations were truth, beauty, and goodness. Well, truth on its own can be sterile. What good is truth if you have no ethics, if you have no integrity? It's about your being and how your being expresses truth through integrity of action and conduct. And beauty. If we're not inspired by beauty, if you can't appreciate a sunrise or a sunset, if you can't be inspired by life, where's the worship? Where's the praise? It becomes sterile. You forget that you're not just a computer, working out what propositional calculus is. It's like, wow, I've got all these emotions, these feelings, this inspiration. Wow, it's good to be alive. It's good to give thanks for the life I've been given. So, there are many facets to life. And if we reduce it to truth, we also then turn the Bible into a set of proof texts, and then people start interpreting 2 Timothy 3:16 about all scriptures God-breathed from a post-enlightenment point of view, and they try and use it like a philosophical textbook, where God-breathed simply means it's alive. God breathed life into Adam. That God's breath in you animates you, gives you life. So what it's really saying is that the Bible is a living document, not as a philosophical proof texting book. So if we just focus on truth, then we end up one-dimensional. So I think we've always got to ground truth in life and goodness, beauty, and the path that we're walking. And that's precisely what doesn't happen in politics. Once it becomes tribalized, once it becomes this version of reality is the correct one, and that's what we're selling you, and any dissenters are extremists, well, that's what happens when you go down that path.
But it's a path that they've never ever had to change. I mean, we spoke about this just before we came online. We spoke about it in other shows. But 2026 seems to be a year, and they've got a 2030 cut-off point. So are we going to see things like this?
First time in history, the Noahide laws are being formally and globally established, complete with a founding charter, rabbinic court, regional councils, a financial infrastructure, and the state of Israel's formal recognition. This November 2026, tens of thousands of non-Jews who follow the 7 laws of Noah will send delegates from 6 continents to Jerusalem for the first international Congress of the Noahides. Now, this is not some little convention. They are founding a global religious movement. The Noahides, or children of Noah, are non-Jews who keep 7 laws Jewish tradition says God gave all humanity. Don't murder, don't steal, don't commit sexual immorality, establish courts of justice, don't eat flesh torn from a living animal, don't curse God, and don't commit idolatry. Now, it's their definition behind that last one that Christians need to understand. The foremost codifier of Jewish law ruled plainly that...
So there we have it. The idolatry thing would be what Christians would say Jesus was God in flesh. The Noahide laws would state that that was idolatry. So the non-Jews that believe in the Noahide laws would be against the Christians that put in speech marks. The Jews would be against them, and therefore Islam would also be against them. So we've got a reckoning coming, would you say?
It's a tough one. It looks that way. It's like storm clouds, dark storm clouds. But if you actually, this is an opportunity for people to think and act in an appropriate theological fashion. An idol breaks the 2nd commandment. Thou shalt not make for thyself a graven image of either anything above the earth, below the earth, and so on. Now, this doesn't actually apply to God. There's a strict monotheism which gets practiced by Muslims, which is called Tawhid, which is designed to protect God's ultimate sovereignty, is aseity. Aseity is basic simplicity and ultimate form, sort of incorruptible, unchangeable. And this leads to these theories of immutability. Now, Islam itself doesn't seem to have a very developed doctrine of the image of God in man. Judaism does, but it's not developed it in the same way that obviously Christian theology has, because, you know, once you have man made in the image of God, it's bidirectional, because although man flows from certain characteristics of God that have godlike qualities, and let's get this right, the Eastern Orthodox talk about theosis after salvation as becoming more godlike. But what that means is not godlike in a kind of New Age sense. It means more reflecting that perfection of God's image as kind of holiness. So once you admit that man is made in the image of God, then if Jesus is a man, then Jesus as a man is, yeah, you could say he's in the image of God, but the only difference is he is the image of the invisible God. So he's not really a graven image, because human beings are made in the image of God. So based on these understandings, and Judaism didn't used to have this understanding, it used to understand the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament as a kind of a theophany. Moses met the angel of the Lord. You know, it's like no one shall see God and live. But there was the angel of the Lord representation. So it's a bit like you had transcendent Yahweh, who couldn't be comprehended or conceived. That's why the Jews started pointing their alphabet, so you had no vowels, so you couldn't pronounce the divine name. Any pronunciation or description of God is to limit God. Therefore, God has a transcendent aspect. but they had the angel of the Lord as his visible representative on earth. Jews used to take that seriously in the rabbinic traditions until, you had the fall of the Second Temple in AD 70, and then you had the Bar Kokhba revolt from, as we said several times before, AD 132 to AD 135. And after that, this whole debate that had been going on in early Christianity as to whether Jesus was the Messiah, the Jews separated increasingly from the Christians. And after the destruction of the Second Temple, the Pharisees were modernizing and saying, look, all these messianic sects and cults are watering down our identity. They became much stricter in the monotheism, much more like you would see in Islam today. So Judaism wasn't always like that. So in theory at least, there would be an opportunity to sit down with a Jew and to say, look, do you know your own history? How well do you know it? If you're just recounting your history from the Balfour Declaration onwards, then, you're missing. Can we sit down? Come, let us reason together. So I think there's still scope to make the case if you're rational, if you communicate, if you understand these things. But I would say within the culture as it is, there's definitely a movement which is not very promising, and that we need to get people who can engage in the debate to point out why it's theologically dodgy to base this graven image thing on as idolatry when there are theological precedents for suggesting it's not as simple as that.
Of course, that's going to be the big debate, isn't it?
Yeah.
If they start to try and push those things as that, is there going to be people who are going to say, no, hang on a minute, this is wrong? Because we don't seem to see the establishment churches being those voices in the wilderness. They seem to have just fell on the swords with everything, from the minuscule things that God says don't do to the absolute loaded things. And it's all based on love and, things that Jesus didn't actually preach, but that's now become, that's watered down the message, and it's even replaced the gospel.
Yeah. Just following the logic through, Paul, it's difficult to extrapolate fully, but I would suggest my best guess really would be that this is where you can't just see the Noahide laws as a political and cultural instrument gaining traction over the world. It seems to me that there's a logical corollary of that, which is that there must be a figure who arises, which is what the Bible predicts, who has a sort of supernatural power. In other words, a messenger, an advocate, a wolf in sheep's clothing, maybe who is a false prophet but has access to some form of signs and wonders, however you understand that, which ratifies the message that this is the correct message, because Bible's very clear that the people will wander after this beast figure because of these miracles, these great miracles that was given to him. So if there's an eruption of supernatural power, now at the moment there doesn't seem to be any evidence in the post-enlightenment world. You still mainly get cynics and skeptics saying we don't see supernatural power. There are lots of people who are atheists.
Are you kidding? Andy Burnham's getting rid of council tax, mate. Andy Burnham's getting rid of digital ID. Is that not supernatural enough for you?
Well, that's where the blurred line is. Bible's very clear that there are signs and wonders. Now, you look at that dragon fire that's made in Bolton at the end of the year 666. This laser that can fire down to heaven in the presence of men, and it's a 50p coin. That would fit a dragon in the sky, bringing fire to earth, which is exactly what Revelation talks about. Now, you could say they've clearly lifted that, because it's resonant, it's metaphorical, it isn't necessarily a fulfillment. But that would be a good example of how technology could seem to mimic, just like transhumanism could be a Nephilim phenomenon, or a contemporary merging with AI as artificial intelligence compared to the original Nephilim, which was obviously a mixing of the angelic with the human. But it would be like a hybrid concept. So you could see technology going down a similar path. You could see that as John on Patmos having a vision of dragonfire, which he saw, and obviously he couldn't understand that was technology because technology didn't exist at that level. So in his vision, he simply saw it as supernatural. You know, we're speculating, but there are ways of reframing supernaturalism as advanced technology. Most people, if they went back in time now with technology to 5,000 years ago with our sort of kit, would think that person was a god or supernatural. So, you know, clearly there are ways of interpreting it without a supernatural emphasis. It can be done, but why would that bring about awe? It's like not one person, it's the tech. People could be amazed at the tech, but once the tech's available, it's not amazement at one person. Many countries are developing this tech. So it's a stretch to say the supernatural can be completely translated into technological advancement. There's an overlap, but it does seem as if there is. I mean, think about how many people that there are on the face of the earth. Let's call it 8 billion, 8,000 million. For one person to stand out in charisma above all the rest, such that they're so notable that people would worship them, it's a big deal. You know, and I wouldn't imagine it's just because they wheeled out some technology that somebody else had designed. It does seem as if there is this figure who carries this authority that people recognise as godlike.
Yeah, that's certainly what they're building up to, and it looks to me like what they're setting out is what we were talking about in other shows, this civil unrest, and it's whereabouts are we up to with this civil unrest? Is there a possibility that we're thinking behind, that they're already ahead of us? Remember, we're talking about the Fabian Society, how slow and meticulous they plan it. They're in for the long game.
Firstly, I think we're already past the tipping point. So when historians a few decades from now sit down to write up this story, they will not point to, chapter 1 will not begin in 2026. Chapter 1 is somewhere already behind us, yeah? In the sense that the conflict, the kind of things driving it towards conflict, are already done. They're decisions that were made or decisions that were not made already in our past. Picture, Wile E. Coyote, Wile E. Coyote? When he runs off a cliff, there's a kind of cliche where he runs off the cliff and he hangs suspended in the air for a while, looks down, and then 3 seconds later, you're Wile E. Coyote. That's where we are. We're suspended already past the precipice. But I think when that happens, you'll have on page 1, Britain, Civil War. Everybody will say, well, that's where we are. That's a moment which is likely to occur.
Likely to occur. Interesting, isn't it? Interesting.
Yeah.
Taylor, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing all right. How about you?
I'm here. We're still going. You're still setting the world on fire, mate. You and your country. We've got wildfires everywhere again.
That's what it looks like. Yeah, boy. Damn, these fires are crazy, man. I don't know if it... I've heard so many different theories about it, saying that people, that they're arsonists causing it. And then, of course, there's the whole, that part of the world is just naturally really dry, and, the governors or the mayors or whatever in places like Canada and aren't doing enough, are too worried about climate change to use their water supply like in California. So I don't know, but it is annoying to say the least. And I feel bad for the people that have to live through it, because it's just like, ugh. But then again, if you ask me, I'm like, why would you keep living in this place that's constantly on fire? It's like you look away for 5 seconds and there's another big ass fire just going there. Like,
well, that's the point. That's what we were talking about, Taylor. If they are being set, what's the reason behind it? Is this land worth anything? If it was worthless, we've heard about it so much through the BLM riots that destruction, capitalism. if a certain area is destroyed, real estate values plummet. So people can come in and buy it up for next to nothing and then build on it. We've heard the allegations in Argentina about how Israelis in Argentina were setting fires, and it just so happens that this would make the land worthless, and people were buying it. So we've got, I think we've had at least 2 fires, one in Scotland on up in the mountains somewhere, and we've got one in England as well. Is there a reason behind it? We just don't know, but it seems convenient that, especially in the UK, we've had one of the record rain falls for winter, yet we're on an hosepipe ban already. But we're having data centres that can use 1 billion litres of water a year. There's so much lies at the moment, Taylor. It's not just wag the dog. The dog's wagging everything that's going.
Yeah, well, there's certain things that just make me go, I don't know. Because I never claimed I know everything, especially considering the fact that, well, when it comes to fires and stuff like that, I don't know. Just
I even heard that they were tying rags to cats, and cats were rushing away through the fire, and they were they were spreading the fire using that. Again, true or not, it doesn't matter. It creates a story, and it creates that little bit more of a mist over what the truth is. And that's what me and Alex were talking about. The truth is so obfuscated these days. Everybody finds a little bit of the truth, and then all of a sudden they stop at that truth. You can't stop at that truth. We've got to see this man who's gonna. There's got to be chaos, and out of that chaos, there's going to become a man who's going to announce peace and safety. Can you see any other way through for that, Alex? It seems to be right on cue at the minute.
Well, it's one of those things, isn't it?
One of them.
With decoying, it's well known in chess strategy that there's all kinds of deflection tactics, decoying tactics. And the problem with discernment, as we typically understand it, is you can't tell just from the surface level. Now, I talked about emotion earlier on in terms of emotivism and emotionalism as a deranging impact when you're less than rational. I don't want to denigrate emotions too much because they have their uses, and in fact, in discernment, it's vitally important to have your emotions, your feeling level, your spider sense operating. So I think the issue is, rational analysis of data points can reveal so much. You can spot, for example, a decoying trajectory. You can spot things that don't add up, that point in a particular direction, which doesn't give you the information. It tells you to be suspicious. Well, that's the mind. Essentially, it's got its place. But I think we need to sit properly in our mind, understanding our mind as a powerful tool, but understand also the limits of the mind, and to understand when something deeper needs to ground us, which we can call discernment from a Christian point of view. You can call it an intuitive knowing. And it's like, how do we feel when something's right or wrong? How do we feel when something's off? Well, it's usually not the content of the speech. It's a lack of congruence between the words said and the tone. And you can look at, like, for example, body language experts can tell the difference between the body's signals and the words that are said. So these are skills that can be developed, but it's important to operate on that level as well, because people will get taken in, even if they're intellectually sharp and can do that sort of phenomenological analysis, like Chomsky's propaganda model, and look at all the different stages of it and recognize and build an outline to see that the story doesn't add up. It's still not going to give you 100% nailed on read. You've got to be tuned into your guts. You've got to watch and use a different set of senses than just the rational. So it's about having the right balance. And to me, how do you build that? Well, You build yourself. People talk these days about building platforms, building AI, building this, building that. But we rarely hear, well, you say they'll build a super soldier, they'll build whatever. But we rarely think about people in terms of building themselves. And if Jesus talked about building on a rock, a foundation, but a foundation is no good if you don't build on it. Building a house on a rock. So your house is your life. It's on a foundation. It's got to be on the right foundation to be stable. But you've also got to build a house. You've got to build yourself up, and that requires a repertoire, a toolkit, and it requires versatility as well, not to be one-dimensional. I think that's our only protection, and I think most people don't have it in them to see through what's happening. So I do think that the long-term trajectory is for more and more people to be suckered. And if somebody turns up then and demonstrates some sort of credentials based on anything, remotely awe-inspiring, well, people are they're going to worship them. It's a bit like Idiocracy.
I was just going to say Idiocracy.
It primes people to see things that are actually quite basic as almost supernatural. So it's that brain drain, it's that emotional intelligence drain, and the only antidote for that is to work on yourself. Jesus said about the parable of the wise and foolish virgins, be prepared, watch and pray. Well, you've got to be looking in the right direction. You've got to be doing your diligence. You've got to have a reflective, meditative, prayerful stance to take you out of the humdrum, because otherwise you'll be propagandized. You'll be watching reels all day. Your attention will be captivated and captured. You've got to cultivate a personal spiritual depth. And what we would say with that is a relationship with God restored through Jesus Christ is the only way to maintain that building. But even if you don't do that, if you don't cultivate any sort of spiritual life, any sort of awareness, then you are not well equipped to really be able to tell the wood from the trees.
Unfortunately, I don't think the people can see the wood for the trees at the moment. Taylor,
Yeah.
I think it's your country that's going to end up in idiocracy. First, we'll be fighting with each other. You'll be in idiocracy. You're going to be one of the most intelligent people in your country if that happens. What's happening in the local neighbourhood?
What's it called? Well, we have the I'm trying to remember the name of it. We have the I mean, as expected, after the World Cup thing, the Fenty junkies are back where they were. They got all that happened was they got shoved out downtown, down to a different part of town, away from the stadium, and then of course as soon as that was over, they came just right back. No surprise there. It's really no surprise, and of course they're still selling stuff on the stolen goods.
Have they at least given them like an haircut and a bath?
So what?
Have they given them at least haircuts and a bath, and before they dumped them back on the street?
Well, I mean, they never took them off the street. It's just they just moved into a different part of town. Yeah, they just literally just pushed them, and then to give the illusion that Seattle was a good place to be. But then as soon as the World Cup was over and nobody cared anymore, it's like, oh well, it can go back now.
Well, I suppose it's better than other countries. In other countries, it's been the dogs. All the stray dogs were all murdered because of the World Cups and stuff. And we've already seen that this. I mean, I have to say, in 50 years of watching football, it's the most blatantly corrupt World Cup I've ever seen in my life, where a president can ring up FIFA and say, listen, can we cancel that red card? Oh, thank you, that's great stuff. We can petition that Argentina want to play the World Cup final again because it wasn't fair. This is a team that didn't have a shot on goal, not a shot on target. They didn't even have a shot on goal. They just kicked the other players about everywhere, and there's this entitlement. And it seems like everybody should be able to blatantly see that. But I remember the Maradona handball in '86. That should not have stood. I don't care what we do. It's a blatant handball. It should not stand, but it did. So I knew FIFA was corrupt then. And we've seen what has ever happened. I mean, Berlusconi being head of FIFA, wow. You know, if we want to talk about corruption and we look at it in the dictionary, I'm sure there's a photograph of him next to it. This is like, this is one of the biggest money-making things of bread and circuses. And people are still hooked. And as I said before, we can sit and we can put out all the information in facts, and they still can't see it. So I think, do we not have a bigger problem, Alex, that in the factual world of nuts and bolts, where we can unscrew them nuts and bolts and we can put them back together so we can see how it all works, we can prove that corruption is there. We can prove the evil. We can prove that it's all being manipulated. But people can't even see that right in front of them. How then do you prove a hope in something that they can't see?
Yeah, well, the problem now is, for everyone really, you have to build a case. I mean, it was always true that people should have built a case. And I think it was Aristotle that talked about evidential truth. In other words, there are certain things that are just automatically almost like self-evident. And even if you could argue that certain things are self-evident, like in other words, they're obvious at a surface level and no rational person could disagree. Now, actually, this is not philosophically credible, but from a common sense point of view, it looks as if certain things could be self-evident. They aren't. They've always got to be demonstrated. But it's getting harder for people because, you know, you have to start with work, labour. I mean, a considerable amount of labour to build a case. And every step of the way, if you build a case based on logical propositions that connect from premises through to conclusions, all of which should be true, all of which should follow from each other, that's a hell of a lot of work just to construct an argument. Now, you know, we're fighting against not just having to present an argument that's true. Like I said earlier, we're fighting against the fact that there are automatically biasing and even heavily distorting factors which make it difficult for people to even receive the logic. So if you try and make a case starting from A, getting through to Z, where you can demonstrate the truth of each premise, that the logic follows right through to the conclusions, to get people to even stay with you on the first premise, they'll start questioning, they'll start arguing. So people actually don't want to understand one another. They don't want to sit down. You know, like we said earlier from Isaiah, come let us reason together, says the Lord. Well, human beings don't want to sit down, probably reason together to establish what the truth is. So what does that actually mean? Well, to me, it means people have already decided that they know what life is all about. Well, I've never been that confident to assume that just because I'm here, I know what's right. They don't then want to engage in processes by which people can come together and establish what's right. Now, a lot of that isn't just about truth. Like I said, it's too narrow. And I talked about beauty and goodness and the life, but the other aspect I didn't mention was wisdom. And what is wisdom? It's something that tests whether the things that we believe and claim to believe actually work, actually add up in practice. If we don't test our experiments, our claims, this is when you end up with all this kind of stuff that goes around on social media, on Facebook now. These outrageous claims about a couple of days of hot weather is proof of climate change, then show it alongside an image of an iceberg melting, and then claiming that it's some to do with some pseudo-scientific mumbo-jumbo that sounds like it might come from a scientist. Then anybody who agrees with it because they've bought into it ideologically says to anybody who disagrees on Facebook, oh, look at this climate scientists, look at all the Facebook experts, look at the bots. So they just immediately go to discredit the arguments, and then there's no arguments because it's just claim and counterclaim, none of which have any substance. So the problem is people have lost the art of debate. and they're not interested in discovering it again. So it's just claim and counterclaim, winning the argument superficially, slagging somebody off, and getting a round of applause from the gallery. Now, I really don't know what's going to change that, because it's simplistic and it's very easy, and people get an ego payoff. So until people decide that they think that there's something even to talk about, then I'm not sure, to be fair, that we'll make much progress. I'm not sure at all. I don't know what the answer is until people develop a willingness to look at their own assumptions. I just don't see whether they're not going to conclude that they're right just because they have thoughts.
Well, that's going to come down to the individual. Any thoughts on that, Taylor?
Well, the answer. Well, I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think that's ever going to happen. I legitimately don't think that's ever going to happen. And I think that it would probably be best for us to give up on the idea of this whole idea of we're going to change the world. We're going to change the thought process of the human mind. It's like, I don't like, at the end of the day, we're not, that's basically trying to say we're trying to play God. We're trying to change the world. We're trying to change how the human brain works, how people think. It's like, it's rather arrogant when you really think.
It's
what's the alternative?
Arrogance.
What's the alternative, Taylor?
Yeah, it's not about arrogance. It's about how do we engage. You're saying how you're saying it is, well, that's just never going to happen. So we just completely disengage with these people. You'd say normies. So we don't bother engaging with them. I've engaged with normies who were 10 years ago were normies who are not anymore. So do you see that it's so bad where you live, Taylor, that it's not worth engaging with these people anymore?
Yes,
I know other people have said that, but I don't see that. I do see a lot of people who can't accept the scale, but they'll all accept a certain level of it's corrupt and they need to do something. But we're still at the stage of, well, I'll vote for Labour because my dad did. That type of thing. But you're seeing something further down the line, are you?
Yeah, pretty much. You pretty much just said it. I've completely disengaged with it, especially at this point. At the end of the day, a lot of people did wake up from stuff like COVID and stuff like that. But we're in the year 2026. If you haven't, with all the BS that we've been shown, if you haven't woken up by this point, you're not going to, unless something drastic happens, which, let's be real, that's probably not going to happen. I've talked about the idea of a false flag before, about this idea of the EBS and false flag. I've given up on that idea, to be honest. I've moved away from that idea. I don't think we're ever going to see anything hugely dramatic at this point. I know I've got a theory about how the operation is going to go further. My guess is at this point. And this is, of course, this is all hypothetically speaking. Obviously, I'm not one of the less than 10 people that know everything. But at the end of the day, my theory at this point is that they've essentially said, "F it." There's no unless we do something that's going to completely cause chaos and unrest. Like big arrests or a false flag or something like that. Unless we do something like a new Pearl Harbor kind of thing. Like the PNAC, like referencing PNAC essentially. Unless we do something like that, we're not going to get a quote unquote mass awakening. So instead, what we're going to do, and again, this is just me speaking hypothetically, is that we're just going to say, forget trying to wake people up. Instead, what we're going to do is we're just going to work on the next generation of people, the Gen Zers, the Gen Alphas, coming up through things like TikTok and learning about 9/11 and World War II and the Federal Reserve and all that. And then once they get into the workforce, that they're the ones who are that the world will essentially just heal itself, essentially, kind of like a reverse of what the deep state did. How over the course of a generation or two, a couple of generations, they were able to completely change the psyche of the American public by getting to the schools. Well, my theory at this point is that they're basically just doing that in reverse, and also, and that, of course, that would mean that we're not going to get arrests, we're not going to get executions, we're not going to get truth bombs. And most likely what will happen is that like 20 years from now, they'll say they'll say, oh, Hillary died from cancer or whatever. Then we might get some truths about like, oh, remember Vince Foster from like 40 years ago? Remember that conspiracy theory? Yeah, it turns out it was real. And then those play it off like that. Oh, remember Obama? Remember Obamacare? Yeah, he was actually a traitor. It's like, oh wow, that's crazy.
So you're advocating, Taylor, for like a form of fifth generational warfare?
That's essentially what it's looking like at this point. Again, I don't know for certain. This is just me speaking hypothetically here, but this is just what it's looking like to me. Just going by all the.
That's interesting because that can work. So it's a plausible theory, but for that to happen, you'd have to have, strangely, a capture of the public institutions that have currently been captured by other institutions. Now, like under Q and stuff, you've mentioned that lots of the media representation, so for example, the insanity of all the Ebola stuff and Hansa virus stuff and bird flu that they're still rolling out in Australia, that this would have to ultimately completely turn around, and those institutions that have been peddling the fake message would start to peddle the correct message, because otherwise things wouldn't change. Your average useless eater, a useful idiot, wouldn't change the vantage point, like unless, like you said, there was like a major catastrophe. So for that to work, we would have to have a complete capture of the public institutions. Now, do you think that that's happened yet and it's just covert, or do you think there's still a lot of work to be done? You think it's already been done?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I've talked about, as far as the media is concerned, we know the media has been under COG for years. I mean, they've proven themselves time and time again. And, that doesn't mean that we're ever going to see the mainstream media ever, the legacy, or I'm going to call it the legacy media at this point. It doesn't mean we're ever going to see them coming out and saying, oh, COVID was a psyop, or 2020 was stolen, or anything like that. No, we're not going to see that, because the whole point is that the media has been given the shovel to bury themselves with. Essentially,
are you seeing Mockingbird being wound back then?
Well, what I'm saying is that Mockingbird is being used for the other way. It's being used against used against what the deep state was trying to do all these decades. Essentially, instead of trying to prop up the media to try to make it look as good as possible, what instead is they're making it so ridiculous that anyone with any rational left in them is turning away from them and turning to social media and podcasters. That's the same thing.
That's my point. That the mainstream media, Mockingbird when Mockingbird was successful, everything that the American public believed would be false. But are you saying now, with social media pointing the way away from that falseness, is it like a bungee where Mockingbird went and it did? Everything that the American public believed was virtually wrong. It had falseness in it. But now are they trying to present the truths, or is it just Mockingbird carrying on?
Well, it's Mockingbird being, like I said, it's Mockingbird being used against them. Essentially, like I said, the mainstream media has been given the shovel to bury themselves with, essentially making themselves look as terrible, as horrible, and as optically
showing themselves to be liars.
Yeah, exactly. Showing their sleeve, essentially, because when they say the most obvious of stupid things that they wouldn't have said in the past, because back in the past, obviously they were full-blown Marxists and telling lies and stuff like that, like the Gulf War and all that. But at the same time, they would be a lot more covert about it. They would be they wouldn't be so obvious. They wouldn't be pushing They wouldn't be pushing them at the 10% side of 90-10 issues or 80-20 issues so openly. Like say for example, during the fake Biden years, when they were pushing the LGBT garbage so hard, despite the fact that everyone was sick of it, that was a huge blow to them, as well as to the huge corporations that were behind pushing for that crap. So it's like pissed everyone off as much as possible to push them away from the mainstream media, and then eventually, hopefully, I don't know if it's going to happen. In fact, I'm kind of skeptical at this point, but hopefully the idea is to basically catch them catch them in the act of doing something that will really hang them, and essentially then you just go and arrest the bastards and show publicly, hey, look, these guys are traitors to the country. They're propagating something that isn't true. You know, the big lie about 2020 not being a stolen election, for example. I don't know. Or maybe they're just having it just die out naturally on its own from like bad ratings, for example, because we know the ratings on the mainstream media are absolutely terrible. Your average podcaster gets more views than CNN does. So that's the thing. And
go on.
Oh, and then at the same time, they're also implanting truth bombs into the mainstream media as well, just like they're doing with the Democrat Party. Like, for example, how they're having the mainstream media as well as the Democrats being hardcore anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, etc. Like the other day when you had Mamdani coming out and saying, "Hey, look, you know, Netanyahu should be arrested. You know, he's an international criminal." So you have the Q left, and then you have the Q right as well. You have both sides pincer attacking the as I call it, the shitty little states. So yeah, you have your Marxists attacking them because they're quote unquote pro-Palestinian, and then you have the right, people like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and all them going and saying stuff about the USS Liberty and stuff like that. So it's a pincer attack. What the final result is going to be, I don't know, but hopefully it's actually going to be good and not just like we'll just forget about this in like a decade or two, But hopefully this won't be one of those things like I mentioned earlier, where this be like, oh, you're not going to get justice. You're not going to get any kind of exposure. It's like in a couple decades, we'll say, oh, Netanyahu, he died of a heart attack or cancer or something like that. And then like a few years after, they're like pulling like a Jimmy Savile kind of thing. You know how it was only after he died that his crimes started coming to light?
Yeah, I mean,
they come to light a few times, but they were certainly buried. Go on, sorry, Alex.
There's an important psychological point to remember when we're discussing this, because it's a big area, it's a big topic. Facts, you can see facts as independent facts. They can stand alone just as a fact. Call it a factoid, if you like, to make realize it's just a small unit. And then there's a bunch of facts that hang together that create what could either be called stories. Story doesn't mean fictional, by the way. It just means coherent pictures about a bigger reality. And therefore, worldviews. Stories and worldviews are sort of fluidly related. Now, we tend to think, from our perspective, that if a fact about a truth that's been hidden for a long time gets exposed, that all the facts connected to that will also topple like dominoes. Well, that's a myth. It's a fantasy. It's not how it works. That's just wishful thinking. We like to believe that actually a few facts getting out into the public domain will lead to kind of a false worldview collapse. It doesn't happen like that. People end up with very complex, interrelated understandings of how facts are related to other facts. So even if one person sees a bunch of facts that make them suspicious and change their worldview, it doesn't change everyone. And those few people that it does change, it's a very slow process. They're probably not going to feed back into the system with much, of a weighty statement that's going to change the balance within all those facts. So facts are configured together, basically. It's very, very difficult, even when a few facts come out, to totally collapse people's worldviews. And in fact, there are very good reasons for that. People are resistant to their worldviews being collapsed because you end up with a fundamental or even catastrophic identity loss. Imagine, if people who formerly didn't believe that 9/11 was an inside job, and then they discovered it was, or that Fauci wasn't doing what he did from the beginning with the AIDS crisis, and then discovered that he did, or that children have been trafficked for so long, and the adrenochrome issue and Pizzagate and so on. It's so big for people to take on board that even a few little facts breaking in, leading to people doubting and asking questions, really leads to a full-on cascade. Therefore, it's difficult to imagine how a lot of these false narratives about the world finally break down. And I do suspect that Taylor is correct in certainly in the sense that it will be, even if the method is 5th gen warfare, it's about influencing a bunch of younger people coming through who won't carry a lot of this distortion that they're having to argue with. They'll be socialized into a new form of sanity that will enable them to see through the nonsense, and that over time these things will get displaced. And then, like Taylor said, somebody will go, in 20, 30 years time it'll be a statute of limitations. Everyone will fancy that about Obama, he was a scumbag after all, but nobody will care then. It'll just be some fact from the past. So I suspect that there won't be radical change of people's psychology shifting. I think that that's a myth. Best case scenario is in 20, 30 years time, enough young people have been influenced to have changed sufficiently that the old BS doesn't stick anymore. What do you think about that, Taylor?
Very well said. I think that's. I think I think you've pretty much nailed exactly what I'm thinking. I mean, for F's sake, we still can't even get people to agree on the idea that that 2020 was a stolen election, or that Russiagate was a false dogma. It's like you want to try to get people to sit down and agree on freaking adrenochrome or 9/11 or freaking or aliens or freaking what shape the Earth is or whatever. Or anything spiritual. Is like, yeah, get the F out of here, bro. You're not gonna do that. I'm just being realistic.
What about Wednesday or Thursday this week? Fauci's got to testify under oath, hasn't he?
I've heard something about that. I don't really care.
Rand Paul has been after him for a long time, so I'm expecting something to come out, but what that'll be and what kind of, if any, ramifications there are,
I doubt it.
I am looking for something that's got to give you on this video, Alex. It's what you were talking about earlier. Somebody's got to come out of this chaos, but what is it going to look like? We don't really know, but we have got indicators. We've got to be doing our due diligence.
Revelation does not say everyone will calculate the number of the beast. It says, let the one who has understanding calculate. 1. A person with enough wisdom to recognize what the world cannot see. And this is not merely intelligence. Daniel says the wicked will not understand, but the wise will understand. The whole earth marvels after the beast. The false prophet performs signs. The image speaks. Fire falls before the people. And buying and selling are placed beneath the mark, the beast's name, or the number of his name. The world sees power. The world sees order. The world sees something that appears impossible to resist. But Revelation places one understanding witness against that entire machine of deception. He calculates the number connected to the name and exposes what God revealed beforehand. 666. That calculation is not a Bible game. It is not random numerology. It is a counter-witness. The false prophet tells the world the beast deserves worship. The one with understanding proves that the name the world honors carries the number God warned about. And Revelation says it is the number of a man. That matters, because the beast may appear greater than man, more intelligent, more unified, more powerful, almost divine. But the calculation tears away the image. It reveals human rebellion dressed in godlike authority. A counterfeit kingdom, a counterfeit name, a counterfeit resurrection, and a counterfeit salvation standing where only Christ belongs. That is why the calculation appears exactly where it does. The mark is tied to worship, identity, commerce, and public allegiance. The faithful must recognize the beast before accepting his name. They must understand before participation becomes worship. Scripture does not yet tell us who this person is, but it plainly tells us that one will possess the understanding necessary to calculate it. Perhaps the world will hear his witness and mock him. Perhaps institutions will call him dangerous. Perhaps only those grounded in Scripture will recognize what he has uncovered. But Revelation preserves the calculation because God will not leave his people without testimony when deception reaches its full power. The whole world will marvel. The false prophet will deceive. The beast will demand allegiance. But one will understand, calculate the name, reveal the number, and expose the man beneath the beast.
What do you think, Alex?
Very interesting take. I've pondered for a while, because when it says, let he who has wisdom, there is different senses. When you first read it, you tend to think of any particular person that might have the wisdom is invited to work out and understand what it is. But another way of reading it is that there is going to be a person who has a specific wisdom configuration who will recognize that and disclose it. That would fit in with, I think it's Daniel 9 and Daniel 12. It's talking about many will run to and fro and acquire knowledge, and by that knowledge save many. That would be an expression of that. I found that particularly interesting in probably the last 12 months, thinking there could well be somebody who discerns with wisdom and confronts, and you know, that's an important ministry. I mean, when I look at my own sort of thinking around wisdom and its importance, I think it's important for everyone generally to make a stand who discern these things and to call it out. Obviously, that's not going to end well necessarily, and we understand from Revelation that there's a couple of witnesses that do that and ultimately end up seeming to pay the price, and then they get resurrected. So it's definitely something where it's going to be so difficult for people in general to see through this tangled web, but there will be handfuls of people who've got the ability to see deeper, and you know, there does need to be some witness, because it's clearly perilous times. There's so much decoying going on, and it's very difficult for people just trying to live their life to see through that level of complexity.
It's easy to be shoulder barged through a sliding door into a reality that looked like the reality that you was in yesterday, but one simple decision, I think it could collapse a different reality. And I think frequency is going to be key to all this. You know, what frequency is it that you're tuning into? Where are you carrying all your eggs? What are you putting them all in the same basket? And whose basket are you putting them in?
Good point, Paul. Yeah. And I would also, just connecting that up, I was curious to ask Taylor, these changes that it's obvious that certain things have changed. I've commented a few shows ago about that. But how would you identify in yourself fundamentally what's changed in yourself in terms of your view of how the strategy now works, whereas before you felt it was going to be in a particular way with the arrests and so on, there was going to be a big exposure. What would you say has changed most within yourself to change your perspective?
Well, I think it just mainly comes down to the fact of, like, when you when you see that people just keep moving the goalpost, essentially, figuratively speaking, over and over and over and over and over again for how many years now, and you keep seeing that, and it's just like, at the end of the day, when people get so excited over stuff like, oh, look, there's a 17 in this, or oh, this what Trump said in this speech matches what's said in the Q drop, because he said it at this precise minute and second. It's like, really? we're in 2026 and this is the best you guys got. Like, come on now. It's like we kept on being told that the 250th anniversary was going to be this big thing. It was going to be this big thing, or the World Cup. Trump tried so hard to get it into the United States, and it's like, okay, all these things have come and passed, and no, nothing's really changed. And then when Trump gave that speech a couple weeks ago talking about voter fraud with the upcoming midterm election, then people were so hyped about it, like, oh my God, this is it. This is the big moment. I'm like, what? Nothing's changed. Nothing has really changed at all.
Interesting.
So it sounds to me a bit like you've encountered a parallel to a kind of a religious loss of faith, but it's like a loss of faith, but it's almost like a loss of faith in humanity, or a loss of faith in your average unthinking person's ability ever to be reached. But it's definitely a kind of maybe it started as a crisis of faith that you've made peace with now. You accept that the ship's not going to get turned around. So it's when you're disillusioned like that, what gives you hope? The belief in the upcoming generation, then?
Oh, well, because well, first of all, because all of this stuff going on has to be for a reason. If the Epstein stuff was just going to go away, then what's it going to matter? They would have just let it go away, just like the mainstream media back when they were not under COG used to do. They would have completely ignored the story. They wouldn't have propped it up as much as they have over the last year or so. And another thing, with this also with this with the whole thing with Israel, they wouldn't have gone to all the trouble of killing Israel's reputation over the last few years since this fake Gaza nonsense for no reason. And not to mention on things like TikTok and stuff like that, you see people, you see like Hitler speeches going around everywhere. You see like a lot of the younger generation, they're really showing a lot of promise. Especially like if you go online, like on Twitter and stuff like that, you see a lot of people are pushing back against the BS, and a lot of these people are younger people. They're pushing back against this BS. Not all of them, obviously. There's still quite a contingent of bad ones, especially the ones coming out of universities that are still getting indoctrinated into the BS. But now we got this recent law being passed in Texas. I think it was like a couple of weeks ago now, talking about how they're going to now, instead of teaching history in a bunch of mumbo jumbo mess with no coherency whatsoever, now they're going to tell history in order of sequence of events, which is really important, because when you're trying to tell a story to someone in history, that's what history is. It's a story at the end of the day. You want to make sure that people understand it and get it. And the only way to do that is if you tell everything in chronological order. So that way that people get the background of stuff. It's like it's like when you go into a movie, for example, you walk into the theater like halfway through the movie, you don't know what the heck's going on. You don't know who the characters are or anything like that. But if you watch it from the beginning, you get it perfectly. So that's a big step forward. And then you have in Florida, you have a bunch of stuff being repealed when it comes to taxes and stuff like that. And just in general, it's looking good for the next upcoming generations. Now, obviously, we can't say for certain what will happen until it actually happens. But at the end of the day, that's looking a lot more positive to me, and rather just a lot more realistic than this idea of, oh, we're just going to suddenly change all of humanity to be, not even to be like Q-ified or anything like that, but just like to have common sense ways of thinking. I think that I think that's just it's like you said, Alex. I think it's an entirely unrealistic way to look at things. Like this whole idea that we're going to change the psyche of people that are in their 30s and older, who already have a firm grasp on how the world works. Like, yeah, have fun with that. You can keep doing that. It's like, oh, in 2028, are we still going to be saying, oh, when's the first arrest? It's like, oh, the first arrest is coming. Oh, 2030. Oh, the first arrest is coming. It's like, how many more years do I have to pass by for people to be like, oh, maybe this isn't going to happen? It's like, at the end of the day, it's like, I'm not going to be one of those people that just sits here for like the next 15, 20 years, still waiting for the first thing to happen that we've been waiting for. It's like, no, it's like you have to see the forest through the trees at some point, you know. Now, I'm not saying that it won't ever happen. It could still obviously happen, but I don't have any faith that it will. So
how do you look back now on your former self when this kind of thing first broke and it persisted for a while? How do you evaluate the overall strength, truth, value of the movement, given that it started there and it hasn't delivered? How have you reconciled that so that you don't completely discredit the movements, but you can sort of change your approach to what it's always claimed?
Well, first of all, yeah, it's easily provable that the Q operation is a real thing. There's some, and it's not like they haven't accomplished anything. Like say, for example, Roe v. Wade was overturned. That would have never happened under normal circumstances. Israel wouldn't have its reputation in the dirt if it were under normal circumstances. We wouldn't have all of this. The Democrats wouldn't be so openly Marxist if we were under normal circumstances. I mean, yeah, it was pretty bad under Obama, but it wasn't like the AOC Mamdani type thing. COVID, we know. I like to think of it as like a kind of thing of also think about the things that haven't happened, if that makes sense. Like just think about what would have happened if Q wasn't a thing. We would have had Hillary elected. We would have had the COVID 5-year lockdowns that Event 201. They talked about that, the Bill Gates forced vaccines, where everyone would have got it, or you would have gone to the little fun camps, et cetera, et cetera. And that's just that's just the start of it. Epstein exposure, that would have never happened, et cetera. Just I can go on and on and on. But at the end of the day, and also the climate change agenda is basically dead. Which is that's a huge step in the right direction, because that was a huge weapon of the deep state to attack the energy infrastructure of humanity. So taking down the climate change agenda is very, very important. There's a video I uploaded recently, or rather I re-uploaded recently to my Rumble channel, that from another channel, going over, I think it's like 42 proofs of 42 things that have happened that prove that Q is real. So, and that's just the start of it. There's so many other things, but the point is that just because you can agree that Q is a real thing and that it's accomplished a lot of good things, but doesn't necessarily mean that we have to always agree on exactly like what the operation is going to end up with. So, because I don't want to be, one thing I really despise about the movement is this cult-like thinking.
Yeah.
That some people have, where it's like, oh, if you don't think exactly like, then you're then you're just like you're a black pillar, you're a troll, you need to be silenced. How is that? I've made this comparison recently. How is that any different than what Bush said after 9/11, where he said
it isn't. It's you think like us or you aren't one of us.
Yeah,
and you're wrong. That's always been the same, Taylor. When you actually tell the truth and people don't want to hear it, that's a revolutionary act. So just by doing what you're doing, the fact that I can see the change like Alex, where you've gone from one extremity saying, no, it's this, and then you've seen things, and your belief, as we were talking about earlier before you come on, those people who have a belief and then bring new information alongside it and can weigh them both up, does it impact it at all? Does it demolish my belief? Does it enhance my belief? Or does it have no impact whatsoever? If you can't do that, then you end up just as one of those just being told.
exactly.
So I get it, mate. We've come up for just on 2 hours, lads. So Taylor, I know you didn't seem to have anything to share because you got on a bit late, but do you want to give us your stuff, what you're doing this week, and where people can find you?
Yes. Okay. So let me go ahead and just show my Rumble, which is that I'm still working on. I've hit kind of a stagnant place at the moment where I'm not really gaining any new viewers or subscribers or anything like that. But trying every day to make, trying every day to see what I can do about it. So this is my channel right here. Yeah, I've been trying to advertise. So this is my channel right here. Wait, no, hold on. Let me click this and then do this. This is my channel right here, Raconteur's Report. I like this logo I got now. It's I got it from ChatGPT. I think it's I think it's pretty good personally. I mean, it's rather simple, but it gets the job done. So this is my Rumble channel. This is what I mainly working on. And next I have my Twitter account, which is right here. Right here. Come on. Yes, right here. Got this right here. I haven't. I'm trying to post on it more, but it does. But it has been. You know, sometimes I end up forgetting about it, kind of. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't particularly use X because you can only type so many words and then.
Yeah, I hate that so much. The character limit garbage.
Yeah, it does me nothing. So.
But yeah, so that's pretty much it. My Gmail is chimpyskippy@gmail.com. I'm currently trying to get a guest on my show if I can, although it's going rather slowly, unfortunately. But hey, what can you do?
Hey, we can only do what we can do. Like I said, let me know, post it in the group, and I'll advertise it for you, mate. Just
appreciate that, man.
No worries, brother. I'll speak to you through the week, Taylor. Take care.
Great stuff. Yeah, cheers, Taylor.
All right. Yep. Cheers, guys.
Good night. God bless.
All right.
So in summing up, mate, I've got one video left, but I can save that for the summing up before we finish because it's to do with what we've been speaking of, and it's to do with what all these religions don't seem to want to touch on, which is actually what, things like what Jesus said. If we're going to call ourselves Christians, then I think we should be at least trying to follow what he said, if that's what a Christian is, because, we do need to question the definition of this. So in summing up, mate.
Right, well, what I'll do, I'm going to read the start of chapter 11 of my, I'm working on a book, but the book I published, it'll be 17 when I'm done. But I wrote a book I published, I don't know how long ago, a couple of months ago now, called Pattern, Being and Reality. And I'm just going to read like a paragraph and a half of chapter 11, because I think it's an appropriate way of tying up all the loose ends. So I call this chapter The Fractal Pathology of a Centre, bearing in mind that an ecology working properly will be healthy, and when it isn't, it'll be pathological and unhealthy. So I talk about pattern collapse. Every civilizational crisis begins as a crisis of pattern recognition. When the relational grammar of reality collapses, the world does not simply become chaotic, it becomes recentered around compensatory fictions of the ego. What appears superficially as political polarization, institutional decay, instability of knowledge, or cultural fragmentation is, at root, a core distortion. The attempt is made to stabilize meaning by installing a false center, and for that we could say Fabianism or whatever, or socialism, where no isolated center can ultimately hold. This pathology is not confined to individuals, nor to movements, nor to institutions. It is fractal. It repeats recursively at every scale of human life. So it's a bit like saying a little leaven leavens the whole lump in the terms of Jesus. So it repeats at every scale, from the solitary psyche to the global civilizational system. The same structural distortion, ego as the center, narrative or story as the world, and representation as reality, reappears in different guises, each level reinforcing and legitimizing the others. So again, if we put our human ego at the center, we're putting a lot of pressure on the human ego. If we take the whole world as an objective reality and reduce it to a story, it's too much for that world to bear, and that story collapses. And if we don't engage with reality, but we represent it in some way, again, it's a model which hasn't got the ability and to hold up. And once you affect it from the individual level outwards, when we don't recognize the pattern, we end up with reality collapsing, and it's fundamentally relational. So once we lose our, when you look at identity politics, when you look at groupthink, when you look at saying we need to privilege and protect the identities of minority groups, that might sound like it's relational, but it's not. It's social. It's just referring to a particular group as a category, as an identity marker. The true reality that's got objective weight is a relational one, and it's not just relational, it's ontological. It's connected to our beingness. So beingness is central and relatedness is central. And as soon as we lose, that objectivity of being and relationship, we end up living in the kind of distorted world that we're living in now.
And if all that is fractal and past, present and future all exists simultaneously, it's just up to the observer of where that reality is, then this is why we see it's so important that if all these religions claim that Jesus is a thoroughly bloody good nice bloke that became something else, or he was just a prophet, or this, that and the other, and all these other ones that say, yeah, he was the Son of God, but he didn't die on a cross, or we can do this, all this mix that goes against actually what Jesus said. So if we've got all these establishments that people are going to and not doing that due diligence, Alex, not doing those thinking that somebody else can do it for them, then I think that's the dangerous thing that we've got to go against. And we'll just, as we're playing out tonight, we'll just listen to the 5 things that churches teach, 5 things that Jesus never said, and we've got to be honest about what this is saying. I'd like to thank everybody in the chat room that's made it through the live tonight. We've been more or less very, tech free tonight. It's been okay tonight. I can't complain too much considering. But yeah, bless you for sticking with us on the live. All those who are listening through the week, thanks for the messages that I've received. The encouragement is, everybody knows there's something wrong, and we're just trying to shine a light on the parts that we know. But at the end of the day, we always point to the one way that there is out of here. Everybody says he's a good bloke and everybody loves him, but he said, I'm the only way. Follow me. Night, God bless, guys.
Night, guys.
Here are 5 things Jesus never said, even though many Christians act like he did. Number 1, follow your heart. Jesus never said that. He said, follow me. Number 2, do whatever makes you happy. Jesus never said that. He said, deny yourself, take up your cross and follow me. Number 3, God helps those who help themselves. Jesus never said that. He said, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Number 4, never judge anything. Jesus never said that. He said, judge with righteous judgment. Number 5, everyone is basically good. Jesus never said that. He said, no one is good except God alone. Sometimes Christians repeat ideas that sound biblical, but they're not the words of Jesus. His real words are far more challenging, far more powerful, and far more life-changing. So here's the question. Are you following what people say Jesus said, or what Jesus actually said? Webby opens up and says corruption starts right in the heart. It moves into the mind and choices before systems tear apart. It creeps into our homes, our laws, economies, and land, until a whole society bears the fruit of fallen man. In the beginning, serpent's lies corrupted what was word. Desire turned to action, and the curse of earth occurred. Cain killed his brother, and the violence filled the ground. Sin didn't stay in just one man. It spreads all around. In our economy, says Webby, greed is made the norm. People valued by production while the needy face the storm. Debt becomes a bondage and leverage turns to gain. In government, authority protects the evil reign. Justice becomes selective, manipulation is the law. Asking what is legal, missing righteousness is flaw. In culture, Webby warns us, corruption turns to praise. What God calls sin is renamed identity in modern day. What God calls shame is freedom. Progress renames the corrupt, calling evil good before the final systems disrupt. Christ does not come to decorate Babylon's domain. He comes to judge the city and call out his own again. Fathers are removed and mothers wounded in the race. Children formed by screens and systems taking over space. Marriage mocked, commitment weakened, order overthrown. Babylon organized in full luxury and trade shown. Alex steps in and asks how we keep the flame burning bright when traditions keep the shell but lose the deeper inner light. If you got it wrong at the top, Alex points it out to sea. Nothing down below can function as it ought to be. Taylor looks at scripture where the truths are clearly read, from the pre-tribulation claims to bloodlines that have led. Taylor asks where this all comes from, searching for what's real, knowing hope is not in this world or what the systems deal. Alex brings up James and says belief has little merit on its own. Thou believest there is one God, thou dost it well, it's known. The devils also believe and tremble in their dread. Intellect creates theories as a shield for where we're led, creating models of reality city and call out his own again. If a system yields control, perversion, greed, and pride, do not call it good. Walk away and stand outside.